As always, our introduction, stimulus, and stimulus class. What is a stimulus? Stimulus is the S in our SRS contingency. The SRS contingency, also known as ABC, antecedent behavior consequence. SRS is stimulus response stimulus, and that is the basis for operant behavior, which is what we work on and study and change in ABA. Stimulus is any change in the environment that evokes a functional relation. Stimulus classes can include physical, formal, feature, so characteristics of stimuli. Can be functional, they can affect behavior. Temporal could be our antecedents and consequences in relation to where they appear in terms of our behaviors. And then arbitrary stimulus classes, they might not share any features or formal characteristics, but they'll affect behavior the same way. So that's our brief rundown. Let's get right into stimulus. Cooper says it's an energy change that affects an organism. In other words, a change in the environment. All these things around us, all these different changes, noises, smells, lights, people that enter the room, people that leave the room, people talking, all these different things are just stimuli affecting our behavior in one way or another. The environment happens, behavior is us reacting to that environment, and then the environment reacting back on us. These are all stimulus changes. So the entire class is talking loudly. Teacher walks in the class. There is stimulus. You have a date planned tonight until you receive a text canceling the date. The text is a stimulus. Energy changes that affect an organism. Humans, in our case, changes in the environment. Just think about stimulus control. You want to bring behavior under stimulus control. Well, what does that mean? That means in the presence of certain stimuli, we're going to see certain behavior. In the presence of certain stimuli, we won't see certain behavior. This is what we want to see, right? Libraries. What kind of behavior does a library evoke? Talk quietly, respectful of other people's spaces. We might wear headphones. We're just generally very polite and buttoned up, right? That library and all of the things inside the library, the smells and the books and the sounds, have stimulus control over certain behaviors. So as you can see, stimulus and stimuli are incredibly important in an ABA. Think about where else we use them. Classes, SDs and S deltas, stimulus discrimination, equivalence, stimulus fading, stimulus generalization, stimulus prompts. The list goes on and on and on, right? Stimuli control behavior. Stimulus is just an energy change that affects an organism, that evokes behavior, that punishes, that reinforces. Have to understand how important stimuli and stimulus are in ABA. With that said, let's talk about stimulus classes. Because different classes of stimuli do different things and have different characteristics. The four we're going to kind of look at are formal, temporal, functional, and arbitrary. We're going to look at functional and temporal in kind of the same light, but formal and arbitrary we're going to look at separately along with functional. How do we create these new stimulus classes? Well, through anything else, right? Pairing. And as you study, I always try to point out the patterns and the things that kind of run together and go together and the similarities and the concepts that we use, okay? The more you can relate all our concepts together, the better you're going to get as a practitioner and at the exam. If you want to create a new stimulus class, well, we just need to do some stimulus pairing, right? And typically this is going to be for functional stimulus classes, right? For the formal stimulus class, they still need to share characteristics. But if we want to have a stimulus evoke a behavior, which it currently doesn't, we need to do some pairing, right? So we're going to present two stimuli at the same time, repeatedly, multiple trials, which will hopefully result in one stimulus acquiring the function of the other stimulus. So first, let's look at physical, formal, or feature stimulus classes. Obviously, they share common physical forms. They're described by physical features, sizes, big, small, colors, red, blue, orange, green, white, weights, heavy, light, and spatial relation. Where do they occur in our environment? Include infinite number of stimuli. So let's look at some examples. Feature stimulus classes create concepts. And why is that so? Well, if we take a bunch of stimuli like tails and noses and paws and four legs, put them all together, we might get a stimulus class or a feature class of dogs, right? Because dogs all share these same stimuli. Cats also share tails and noses and paws and four legs, right? So we're creating different concepts using these feature stimulus classes, and then we teach learners to discriminate between the different classes. You get an idea of how concepts are formed. If we take wings and cockpits and landing gear and propellers, right, combine them all, make airplanes. And all these airplanes form a stimulus class. And then cheese, bread, toppings, crust, put them all together, get pizza, right? All these feature stimulus classes share these common physical features and forms. Now, if we look at functional stimulus class, which is what we're typically more concerned with, right? We're all about function here. They all affect the behavior the same way. So, does the stimulus temporarily affect the behavior? Does the stimulus permanently affect the behavior? What the questions you're going to be asking yourself as you identify the different stimuli and the functions of those stimuli. And when we think functional, we want to think temporal. Because what in ABA do we say evokes behavior? Antecedents. What reinforces and punishes behavior? Consequences. So if we look at our SRS contingency, our antecedents and our consequences are going to make up these functional stimulus classes, right? Because if you think of ABC, our antecedent stimuli is going to evoke that behavior. Our consequent stimuli is either going to reinforce or punish that behavior. So functional stimulus classes also create functional stimulus classes. Functional stimulus classes affect behavior the same way. When we're looking at different stimuli and how they're affecting behavior, let's ask ourselves, does the stimulus temporarily affect the behavior, or does the stimulus permanently affect the behavior in the future? In other words, think temporally. Think about the stimulus in relation to the behavior that's occurring. What do we mean by that? Well, when we have SRS, stimulus response stimulus, or ABC, we have antecedents and we have consequences. And ideally, we want those antecedents to happen as close to the response as possible. Same with the consequences. When you're thinking antecedents, you're thinking consequences, you're thinking what is evoking that behavior, what is reinforcing or punishing that behavior. All those things are just stimuli. And all those different types of antecedent stimuli make up a functional stimulus class. All those different consequent stimuli can make up a functional stimulus class. Whatever is affecting the behavior the same way can make up functional stimulus classes. So, for example, different types of music make you dance. Rock, rap, pop, whatever type of music you're listening to can all evoke the behavior of dancing. Stop signs, red lights, and hand signals make you stop. Different chairs make you sit down. Different tokens might reinforce you. All these different stimuli make up a class that affect behavior the same way. And then arbitrary stimulus classes. They evoke the same response, do not share features. Not physically similar. They're not formally similar. Okay? They're very arbitrary in relation to one another. But when we look at our behavior and responses, they're all evoking the same exact response. For example, when we say 50%, we say 1 divided by 2. Say divided evenly, and when we say 0.5, what we're really saying is half. When we say apple, banana, avocado, and grapes, what we're saying are fruits. Apples, bananas, avocados, and grapes don't necessarily share physical or formal similarity, but they all make up a stimulus class, and they evoke the same response of fruit. And then monkeys, giraffes, tigers, and lions all make up animals. So you can see all of our stimulus classes start to form these concepts, right? We start to form these heuristics where we combine different stimuli together, making classes and making concepts. Arbitrary stimulus classes similar to functional stimulus classes, right? They evoke the same response. However, they just don't share the same features. Wrapping it up, stimulus, the S in our SRS contingency, changes in the environment that evoke a functional relation. Okay, so anything that affects the organism, any change, noises, sounds, people, things, objects, everything in our environment that's constantly changing, right? Can lead to, we can take those stimuli and we can create classes. We can create stimulus classes by physical, formal, or features. We can group stimuli together by their function and how they temporally appear in relation to our responses. Or we can create arbitrary stimulus classes, stimuli that evoke the same behavior, don't share any formal characteristics. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. For our BCBA materials, be sure to check out bcbastudy.com for 3 practice exams, our 5th edition task list study guide, and our